Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the North Wales Technical Talk presented by Adam Daniels from Sibelco. And the theme is the story of a greenfield site. Over to you, Adam, if you're ready to go.
Afternoon, everyone. Well, Mark's made his first mistake in assuming that it's going to be informative. Hopefully it might be entertaining, but informative we will find out. I'm hoping a couple of my colleagues are on the line as well. So a gentleman called Mike Davis that some of you know, and a lady called Karen Jinks who are going to support me through some of this presentation. The theme you'll pick up is how we can't plan for anything. When I agreed to do this 12 months ago, you know, in the deal was that I get a trip to Colwyn Bay, I get my sandwiches as normal, and even, you know, half a Coke. But unfortunately, the world changes and we have to deal with these situations, and we're doing it like this. And so that's the sort of the theme that hopefully you'll pick up through this presentation. So we'll start off with just a little bit about Sibelco. We're very conscious as an organisation. We're a pretty big operator that nobody knows anything about. Whenever you mention the name, you know, Tarmacs, Emmets, Hansons, all the big boys, even some of the regional guys, you know, you Mick George of the world, people know what they do. Sibelco, everyone looks with a little bit of confusion. We're a Belgian company. The clue is in the name, but very few people know it. So SI for silica, BEL for Belgium, CO for company. In 2022, we'll have been operating for 150 years as a business, and the heartland is in the Lommel district of Belgium. But currently, we've got around 5,500 people spread over 31 countries, North America, South America, Australia, Asia, but primarily in Europe. And we're in primarily silica, but also in high purity quartz. So chances are if you've got a Samsung or an Apple mobile phone, it's got our quartz in the screen, but then we're also into clays, so ball clays, kaolins, calcium carbonate, nepheline, olivine, which is in the steel industry, as well as the typical mineral sands. From a UK perspective, we've been a few companies over the years. Our oldest operations in the UK is down in Devon. They've been going for just over 300 years. Our oldest silica operation is King's Lynn, which has been going for about 132 years. So we're quite a fay with what we're doing. As it sits today, we've got 10 operational sites. So our head office is in Cheshire. That's where I am now. We've then got 3 silica operations in Cheshire. Another silica operation called Messingham up near Scunthorpe, one in King's Lynn, and one down in Surrey. We've then also got a dolomite deposit up in Doncaster. We've got a micronizing facility in Brassington in Derbyshire. And then we've got 2 ball clay operations down in Devon, one in King Staton near Newton Abbot, Torquay Way, and one in North Devon. And then we've also got a kaolin operation down in just outside of Plymouth, up on Dartmoor. So a couple of our old names before we took the Sibelco brand name back in 2007. Before that, we were WBB Minerals, Watts, Blake and Burn. Before that, we were Hepworth Minerals and Chemicals. And before that, we were British Industrial Silica. And the thing that people do tend to know us by and remember us by is the camel that used to travel around the country on the back of the silo trucks. Cuthbert the camel, who does still live somewhere in Cheshire. If you're ever out driving around, you might spot him poking over a fence. So I never miss my opportunity to remind people of the value of silica. As well as my role at Sibelco, I'm also the current president of SAMSA, the Silica and Moulding Sand Association. And we've come to the conclusion people don't realise just what sand goes into. So the very quick sort of narrative I like to give is your morning in silica. So when you woke up this morning and looked out your window, I can guarantee it will have had sand in it from our King's Lynn deposit. It will have had dolomite in it from our dolomite deposit up at Doncaster. When you went to your toilet, good chance, even if it's a toilet, well, it will be a toilet that was made abroad, but even if it was made in India or Mexico or on the continent, it will probably have a degree of our ball clay in it, but it will also have silica in it as a sort of a filler within the ceramic body. Your shower, the water that comes out of it will have been filtered using industrial silica in the UK. The fittings, when they cast the fittings, they take all the burrs off them using industrial silica, and even the tiles, up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was a good chance that they'd also been produced in the UK at someone like BCT, British Ceramic Tiles, again with Sibelco ball clays and Sibelco silica in the body of the tiles, and then potentially kaolin in the glaze. Believe it or not, your toothpaste this morning when you brushed your teeth has got silica in it. We take silica from our deposit down in Surrey. That goes up to a company in Warrington, Unilever. They turn it into silicate, and then it goes into your toothpaste as the abrasive compound in order to get them clean. Your toaster, how we can get sand into toast, you know, there is a link. If your toaster's white, it's got titanium dioxide in it in order to give it the white colouring. The titanium dioxide comes across from mineral sands out of Texas. It goes to a company over in Hull, and it's only Cheshire silica, which is strong and hard enough to be used in the scoring of the pipes to keep the process clean. And so that has to be used. And even your shoes, when you buy a new pair of shoes and you get that little sachet that says silicate, do not eat, that comes from our sand as well. So sand is in absolutely everything in your house. And then even when you get in your car, I deliberately pick a Nissan, but if you've got a Nissan, the engine will have been cast using Sibelco sands from Cheshire. Your windscreen will be made using Sibelco sands, which has probably gone to Guardian. If you have a look in the bottom corner, you'll see it. Your brake pads will have varieties in it, which has been micronized at our facility in Derbyshire. The sound insulation will have our varieties in it as well. And some of our sands will have also been used in the North Sea to get the oil out of the ground or out of the seabed for both the lubricants and the petrol. So it's in absolutely everything. And it's the thing that we push. You know, I think we're all hopefully singing off the same hymn sheet on a call with the Institute of Quarrying. The only reason we dig it out of the ground is because the demand is there from the end user and from the marketplace. So that's a little bit about Sibelco. We'll now get into sort of the body of the presentation about our new sort of greenfield operation, which we set up in 2020 in Cheshire, called Rudheath Lodge. But I desperately searched for Dylan Thomas being at the Welsh Institute of Quarrying branch, but I couldn't find a quote that worked. So we've gone for a Robert Burns one of best laid schemes of mice and men can get ugly. I'm not great with my Scottish, but often go wrong. I'm very conscious, it's probably got worse since we've all been stuck in our houses and the only transport we have to the wider world is through the internet, that everything looks great. You go on LinkedIn in the morning and everyone's doing fantastic projects and everything's going brilliantly and they've invested in new things. You know, we have these IOQ talks and people talk about best practice and what they've done that's gone well. That is not the real world. In reality, things go wrong, or things that we weren't prepared for or couldn't prepare for come out of the woodwork. And I think that's one of the things which we're very good at as a quarrying industry, and we've done it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We're able to adjust to them. And so the narrative, the story of today is how we as an organisation had to adjust to an ever-changing political, social and economic environment with a new deposit. So the story covers 14 years. So 14 years from the first idea, the first germ of an idea being created to, you can see there the picture on the right, Kaz with our managing director Mark James cutting the inaugural rope and opening the site officially in September 2020. So just a little bit about our history in Cheshire. The first sand was extracted around 1912 As you can imagine, the records aren't particularly detailed back then, but that's roughly where we think we were. There's 3 silica operations in Cheshire, one called Shelford, the new one, Rudheath Lodge, and a site called Ben Farm. Shelford is probably the biggest industrial silica site that's ever existed in the UK over a period of around 92 years. We have taken out over 64 million tonnes of sand. Up until the early 2000s, the majority of that was going to Pilkington Glass up in St Helens. And as I said, chances are that a window put in before then would have had our glass in the float process. Also used for container glass, so bottles, beer bottles, and a very small amount used for clear bottles. Products we produce, typical, wet sand grades, dry sand grades. We were doing calibrated sands and also sport sands, root zones. It's one that's sometimes forgotten that all the Premier League football pitches are made up of sand and sand soil mixes. The pitches that you see, they're called a deso pitch, even though they look like 100% real grass, they're only 50% real grass, 50% artificial. And the actual strands of artificial grass go down over 1 metre. And so you can imagine they have to build up the layers of sand in order to give the structure and give the support to the artificial grass. So, starting a new operation, what is it like? I've always described it as a Rubik's Cube of timelines. You think you've sorted it and you've got one colour all matching up, and then you look at the other side and it's a wonderful selection of colours and nothing seems to work. We had to balance, multitude of factors, starting with the employees. Sometimes they're a bit further down the list, but for me, they're the number one thing on the list because they're what makes what we do achievable. Geology, we can't control the geology. The sand is where it was laid tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years ago. Landowners, both new and existing owners, local communities, planning, government policy, technology. When we're working on such long timelines, the technology changes, regional infrastructure, and finally, the one that sometimes we do forget is the customers as well. So you can see, it's not just a case of, well, we're going to dig a hole, where should we dig it? Let's dig it. It's balancing all of these factors. So people often ask us, how do we know where the sand is? And there's a few ways of doing it. One is to go to people like the BGS, British Geological Survey. They've got fantastic wealth of knowledge and data, and that can steer us into the direction where the silica may be, the sand may be. Another way is to look for place names. If you find somewhere called Sand Batch, chances are there's sand there. If there's a road near you that's called Sandy Lane, there's a chance that there's sand there. But we also look back at where we used to operate. And these 2 incredibly glary pictures that are put up are of Rudheath Lodge in 2001, when it closed as an operation for a multitude of reasons. And it was assumed that all resource was exhausted. So, we often talk in the world about we've got to be looking forward, but sometimes looking back can give us the best steer on where we're going to go. So once we've got an idea of where we want to be, where there may be mineral and where there may be customers to supply that mineral to, we do our exploratory drilling. Mark and others will know when I do presentations, I'm never afraid to go to the basics. I think it's one we often forget in life, and we go for the complicated solution, or we assume that everybody knows the basics of what happens. And I learned my lesson on this once when I was talking to an incredibly clever professor at university about industrial silica, and he assumed after 20 odd years of looking at industrial silica, it came from the beach. He didn't realise it came from a quarry, because no one had the nerve to tell him in 20 odd years that it came from a quarry. And so there's no harm in going back to the basics. So we literally drill a hole. We use and again, Mike or Kaz will jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, we use an air swept percussion drill rig. So we drill the hole, compressed air is pumped down, blows the sand back out, we collect it in metre intervals, and we log it. We literally log the colour. Is it white? Is it brown? Is it not sand? Is it something else? At that stage, and we make our first assessment at that point. Is it even worth doing further analysis? If it all comes back as silt, well, there's not much point in going any further. So the rig you see there, that was back in 2006 on the field in Cheshire at Rudheath Lodge, drilling the boreholes. So once we've drilled and we've made the assessment, yeah, it's worth taking a step further. We take it to the lab and we do a simulated wash or process. What could we produce? What particle size distribution would we get? What chemistry could we get from it? What iron content, what alumina, what discrete minerals are in there, what chrome's in there, what aluminosilicates are in there, all of these things which our sort of end customers are interested in. I don't know how big your screens are and how much you want to look in detail, but that there is me in 2007 washing the sand that had come from a test pit at Rudheath Lodge. There's 3 people involved in the project who saw it from beginning to end. So literally the first samples through to the first ton off of the towers, and I was one of them. So that's me running the pilot plant, where we were able to run a small plant 1 ton an hour to simulate the process, producing a sample. At that time, that was actually going off to Pilkington Glass for them to see if it would have worked for their process. And I always like to show that picture because, for me, that picture is a tale of how far we've also come as an industry and a business in health and safety. We can't have a presentation without the mention of health and safety. On that day, you probably can't quite see, I'd knocked my front tooth out. The investigation comprised of, have you got dental insurance? And, have you got the money to get it fixed? And that was about it. I'd like to think we're much more advanced now that if someone has a slip, trip or fall and knocks the tooth out, we'll do something about it. So once we've got the analysis, we know that there's silica there, we know that there's a market for it. That's when we start putting our plan in place. What's interesting is we often work back from what the landowner wants. As a business, we tend, to lease and pay a royalty, and so the landowner wants value in their land after we've been there. It's all well and good taking the mineral, but what can we leave them with? Some cases, people would rather leave mineral in the ground in order to get arable land back or workable land. In other cases, they're happy to create, say, a water body if the water table is particularly high. In this case, at Rudheath Lodge, the landowner, they were happy to have a lake. So we working back from the final restoration, we come up with our phased quarry plan. What you can see on the left, I don't know if you can see me cursor, but this is the plan for Rudheath Lodge that went off into the planning. So where we'll start, where the wash plant will be here to the north, and the phases running through over the 10 to 12 years that will be operational. And at that point, we're in control. We're in control there. We're talking to the landowners. We're working on the projects we've got. We can dictate the timeline. If we want to get that done in 6 months, chances are we can get it 6 months. We then take the step, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, into the slight realm of the unknown, which is then the planning system. So to give you an idea of how it should have worked, Chelford was becoming exhausted in December 2016. At that point, there was no mineral and there was no planning. Planning ran out. Our plan was to submit our planning in 2014 for Rudheath Lodge, with the idea of it taking a year to get through the system. Planning released in 2015. That gives us well over a year to build the plant, so that 6 months before Chelford's exhausted, the new operation starts. We do a beautiful, seamless transition with our customers, and I've got hair still. Sadly, that's not how the situation unfolded. We submitted our planning in 2014 as planned, and there was a slight complexity to the planning in that it was a split boundary application. And this comes back to my first point of we can't control the geology, we can't control where the sand is or where a field boundary is. These are things that are fixed in time and in history. So you can see on the picture here on the right-hand side, that sort of turquoise greeny line is the boundary between Cheshire East, which is here, and Cheshire West and Chester, which is here. So initially that went in as a delegated power application or delegated authority application just to Cheshire East. We've got a mineral authority, I've got history of granting mineral applications for industrial silica. And so Cheshire West said, okay, Cheshire East, you look after it for us. We highlighted a few issues with that. We didn't think it had been done quite right. This was flagged up and it then had to be withdrawn because the two councils went away and decided actually we needed to submit the planning application to both of them. So we're back to square one. Now, it's not too bad if you're back to square one after a week, but we were back to square one after well over a year. So suddenly the timelines are disappearing. So back in 2016, we resubmitted the planning application to the two councils. Then took us another year to get to our first planning committee, which was Cheshire East. We got approved. Then took us another year to get to our second planning committee, which was Cheshire West. And then from there, because there was some additional information, we had to go back to Cheshire East with that additional information to a third planning committee, which was approved again. So you can see now the timeline is well run on to February 19. And then in February 19, it was called in by central government, by the Secretary of State to be reviewed. It only takes one person to raise it with their local MP and the local MP to support it, and it can be called in. So it was called in, it was reviewed, and we finally had planning released in July 2019. So as you can see, at that point, we're well past Chelford's exhaustion date. In the interim, we've been doing work there to reduce volumes, to extend the life. You know, it's one of the easiest things. We'd also put in a time extension on that deposit, and we've been able to take some additional reserve, working with the landowners to try and match the timelines up. But we came up against a hard close that mid-year 2020, Chelford had to stop for a multitude of reasons, primary ones being mineral exhaustion, and secondary being that we hadn't extended our restoration date. We've done this deliberately. You know, machines have advanced, working methods have advanced, so that we knew we could restore quicker, but we knew we needed 6 months to restore that site, to give it back to the landowners who wanted it back January 2021 of this year. So that was our hard close. That's what we had to work to. So at that point, we've now got 12 months at best to build a brand new operation and start to supply our customers. And at this point, Mike, Kaz, feel free to jump in and start correcting me, because this is where your realms of expertise exceed mine. So at that point, you'd have thought, right, not much more can go wrong for Sibelco. You know, they've had all the issues with planning, they've had all the government issues. You know, they've got 12 months. Surely we can build a plant in 12 months. In that period, we had the wettest winter on record locally. We were completely out of sequence in terms of times of the year. So where, you know, we all know we'd all love to place concrete and do civil work in the middle of summer. We were laying civils in December at a best temperature of -2. And those of you with the experience of concrete will know that is far from ideal. We had changes to the highways plans from the local council, but we were dealing with all them and it was all right, and we're making headway. And then in February, March, it all seemed a long time ago, doesn't it? 12 months ago, COVID-19 hit, which would be a big enough impact for local business operating with local people. Being an international business, we have sort of standards that we work to. We have central engineering, we have preferred suppliers, and very little of our plant was coming from the UK. So at that point, we were, you know, our dredge is coming from Germany, our screens are coming from America, and the engineers building the plant, the actual, you know, the physical on the ground fitters and electricians, they were Italian and Bulgarian. So suddenly they made a mass exodus, and we had to deal with that as well. But some of you will have seen, we achieved it and July 2020, May 2020, we did produce the first tons. So that's the summary. I'm going to go slightly back now and just work through that construction process and some of the things that we encountered, again, which would be unforeseen, but hopefully education, because that's the whole point of these technical evenings, is education for others. Because we were out of sequence, we were going to have to remove hedgerows out in the bird nesting season, so we planned for that, and we netted all the hedgerows. Fantastic. What we didn't account for, but luckily through the close management, one of the things we did is put Karen Jinks in as the manager from day one, or even before we got our tickets released, so we had a presence on site and monitoring, is that the netting was sabotaged. And not obviously sabotaged. Obvious sabotage would be to slash the front of the nets to allow the birds in, which you can easily see from the road. The reality is we had the netting slashed from the back, so it wasn't obvious from the road, not easy to pick up, and again, had the potential to completely stop the project. That hedge needed to be removed in order to create a new entrance to the site, in order to get the equipment in just to construct the site, forget getting sand out of the door. So suddenly, when you've got such a tight timeline, a little hiccup like that can completely scupper the job. We then got in, finally, the ground was cleared, but again, it's beautiful sand underneath. This is where we're building the plant site, but we're now in a wet period. We've got bad ground conditions. We couldn't get a dumper on, so we had to get a tracked dumper at short notice in order to remove some of the soils and start some of the profiling work for the site. And then, as I touched on 10-15 minutes ago, we hit the wettest winter we'd had on record locally. The image here on the left is the main ditch that runs through the farm, and the image on the right here is we had to replace a culvert under the road, and we had to do some road modifications. Would have been a really easy job, a 3-4 week job probably in the middle of summer, but in October, November, December, it became a monumental task of sort of trying to part the sea almost. But again, we just called on the people that we knew. We called on the experts, and we adjusted the plan. When the first plan didn't work, we didn't think, well, we're committed to that idea. We'll move on to the next one. And in the end, we came up with a company who used, Mike correct me on this, but used rods that go into the ground, multiples of them to dewater the area. Guys who are into civils will probably know it better than us. But we then used that technology on another site, on another project. So, there's a learning opportunity in all of these issues that come our way.
Adam, it's probably worth highlighting that that's actually a public highway where you see the cofferdam created. So just go forward one. And this was one of the major obstacles we had in the road closure that was programmed for 12 weeks. Was extended to 18 weeks due to some delays with the council caused by workers and COVID, so that the water build-up was quite vast, creating the issues requiring that to be cofferdammed all the way through.
So this is the site at Christmas in 2019. So tickets were released in mid-year 2019, and as you can see, this is the road Mike's talking about. The concrete being poured, and you can see the ground, how wet it is. And unfortunately, you don't get a feeling for just how cold it is at that time of year and the challenges that give. And then this just gives an overview of the deposit that then we were trying to work. Our focus very much at the minute on where the plant site is. This is the deposit. We're reaching around these boundaries all the way around to the top. But you can see at that point, it's still a working farm. That's another one that we work very hard with the landowners, is allowing them to continue to operate their land, for as long as possible, to maximise the use of that land. So as I touched on briefly earlier, March last year, this is the stage we were at when COVID hit. So you can see the framework of the building had just started to go up. the framework of the towers had just started to go up. The civils were all in, and the tank, we've got a large 800-ton feeder tank for the site, so we'll get onto it in a minute. The site's dredged, but the feeder tank at 800 ton, the parts for that had just arrived from Italy. The Italian engineers to construct it had arrived, and then they left. So what do? Do we stop, or do we find a solution? And we found a solution, and we work with local people and people within our own organisation. You know, we all know people like a challenge, people like an opportunity to test themselves, to step up to the mark, and the local team really did. It's worth mentioning probably at this point that the engineer that was overseeing the project, he'd got a little bit of experience in the business, as at this point he was celebrating his 50th year with Sibelco, having joined as an apprentice at 15 years old. And he was seeing this through to the end. When he finally did finish, when we finished the site, he had achieved 51 years and 3 months with the business, which is a phenomenal achievement for anybody. In May, we finally launched the Dredge. This was another great example of sort of, I'm going to use British ingenuity from the companies that we were working. We were working very close with a company called Lindrick Engineering, as well as our own local engineers. So the Dredge came from Germany in 4 parts. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. No one on site had ever put a dredge together, but the thought process was, well, we've all done Meccano, we've all done Lego, we've all worked around pumps. It can't surely be that hard. And so the guys set about and they constructed the dredge using the power of WhatsApp and the power of Teams calls and mobile phones. And May 2020, the dredge was launched, and it didn't sink. That was the main output for the day, is for the dredge to stay afloat, and the dredge stayed afloat. I love showing this picture as well, because I often get picked up by smart people who go, well, that's May 2020, COVID had hit at that point. Those guys there aren't socially distancing. Those guys had created their bubble. They were literally living, sleeping, working as a single team for a 12, if not longer, probably 16-week period. They'd committed their lives to getting this project done for us. And it goes a huge way. You know, we couldn't do it without the commitment of people. And it's not special to Sibelco. It's one I pick up as I go around the industry, the real commitment that we've got from the workforce. And I think it's one that we've got to continue to celebrate and continue to focus on. So May 2020, the plant was built. The plant was constructed, but we're still not on any stand. By the end of May, the start of June, the towers were full. The plant had run. It had its usual snagging issues, but again, through the commitment of the local workforce and the local team and the operators that we'd got in there from the very beginning. So it wasn't a case where we didn't, historically, we'd have built a plant as engineers. I used to be in engineering. We'd get the plant commissioned and then we'd hand it over to operations. We did it different this time. We built it together as engineering and operations. We commissioned it together as engineering and operations, and that meant that everybody had the same level of knowledge, and it was that seamless transition. It also meant that the people who know how to operate a plant picked up some of the things that probably weren't quite correct in the engineering and the design of the plant, so we were able to adjust. And the dredging started as well. It's quite an interesting deposit in terms of dredging, because traditionally when you dredge, it's very deep. Locally, there is another company, Tarmac, up at Eaton Hall. They dredge. I wouldn't want to say how deep they dredge because I don't technically know, but you know, they dredge much deeper than us. Our deposit is only 4 to 5 meters in depth. It's incredibly shallow. Very small amount of overburden, as you can see, just the spattering of soils, and then we're straight into the sand, and underneath that we go straight into clay. And they're just sort of for an overview of the operation. So you can see our wash plant and yard here, quarry to the east, and we'll be working around in that sort of clockwise motion as you saw on the original plans. Mr. Davis at the last IOQ talk had some videos of his dredge, so I only thought it was appropriate to put in a short video of our dredge. Mike, did you want to just give some, or Kaz, some facts on the dredge?
So Kaz has joined us here. The dredge is rated at 250 tonnes an hour. We don't work it to its full capacity. It's currently manned, as you see a boathouse on there, but has the technology to be operated from the shore. So once we get into some free water, this will be operated from the process plant site remotely at up to a kilometre away. It actually pumps at, say, 250 tonnes an hour as capacity, and that's about along a line of around about a kilometre, maybe 1.1 kilometres at its furthest point.
Thanks, Mike. And you might have all gathered already after listening to me for 40 minutes that, getting a word in edgeways or making me silent doesn't happen easily, but the local team managed to do it. You probably can't see it, but unbeknown to me, they named the dredge. Every boat's got to have a name, and it was named after my daughters, which I'll be honest is probably the proudest achievement of my career. So I touched on a few, but the facts about Rudheath Lodge up and running. First tonnes dispatched in the August, roughly 10 years reserve, 3.3 million tonnes. 170 acre site, 3 acre plant site, and that's a number to try and just remember in a minute because we're going to touch on something else. But 3 acres for a plant site is pretty small considering the volume that's going out. Plants, we own the plant site, and then we pay a royalty on the material. Wet dredge extraction, and there's 9 FTEs on site with 4 additional shared with a sister site. One that Mike's probably covered most of this, the dredge parameters. One of the bits of technology we're really using in earnest is the sonar, the dredge naught system, so we can see what sand we've took, what sand's left behind, and use that also on our reconciliations at the end of each month and each quarter. And then a very brief overview of the site and how compact it is. So entrance, very small office, wash plant, 3 wash product towers, or 3 wash products over 2 towers and some spare ground. We started this with the thought of lean sand production. We're all talked about lean. We all talk about just-in-time production. We thought how smooth and how seamless can we get it? And one of the KPIs, one of the things we work to is wagons. I think most of us are aware one of the biggest risks on the site is wagon drivers. Not because they want to be a risk, but because they travel to multiple sites. They may not be familiar with the site. The longer they're on site, the more risk they are of them having an incident. We managed to get it so that from a wagon turning in off of the main road to going over the Weighbridge to being loaded back over the Weighbridge and out is averaging less than 5 minutes. And that's on 29 ton full loads, not on 8-leggers, that's full loads. So the things we've done for that, we've got an unmanned automated Weighbridge system, which links to our ERP system, but then that's also linked to our loading shovels. So as soon as a wagon goes on the bridge, puts his number in, it pops up in the loading shovel so the driver can see who the haulier is, what the registration number is, what product they're taking. He's able to load that. He's then also able to do his quality certificate off of the pad in the cab. No getting out of the wagon, no interaction on the ground between the wagon driver and the haulier, and most importantly, no beeping of wagon drivers or loading shovel drivers to say your load's full or you're good to go, because that was one of the issues we got with our one neighbour. She was very polite in what she said. She said, I don't like the beeping, can you stop the beeping? So that was one of the ways we did it. And just a few more images of the site and the dredge. I think I've touched on most of these as I've gone through, a few of the challenges we had designing just-in-time manufacturing for silica, the planning, local community, geology and hydrology, the opportunities. We've seen the benefits of a simpler modular plant that's potentially transferable. We don't use gravimetric separation, alternative grades, and making the most of local resource. One of the other things I'm keen to push, there's a theme in there, hopefully you're picking up, that plans change, we change, the situation changes. We'd normally in Sibelco had a grand opening, so our colleagues and from the continent had come across and seen the site, and we'd have opened it that way. COVID, nobody could come across, so we did a virtual opening, and using drone footage and GoPro footage, we were able to give a full tour of the operation. what was really interesting is that, you know, the team of us that had been there all the way through thought we'd done a pretty good job. Through the virtual openings, our colleagues in Europe, some of them sat quite comfortably, probably in the living rooms or their offices, spotted things we missed. Our traffic management wasn't great for getting pedestrians from cars to the Weighbridge, and there was some issues with ladders. And we corrected them. You know, we weren't defensive. We actually said, brilliant, you know, fresh pair of eyes. And in reality, it was the focus of doing it over video which got that level of attention. You know, being on site, you don't always spot it through the sort of the fog. So that was Ruddy's Lodge. I'm very conscious we're getting close on time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about Chelford as well, because if anything, this is as impressive, if not more impressive. So Chelford, some of you on the call may have visited, but as I said, you know, over 60 million tonnes came out over 90 years. It was primary industrial silica for the glassworks for many, many years, and was a big operation. The plant site alone was 52 acres. So you think we've gone from 52 acres to 3. You know, that shows development in the industry, development in the technology, and development in the thinking. Because I remember turning up at Chelford 15 years ago and being told we didn't have enough room for what we wanted to do. So we pushed in the right direction. We then had 720 acres of active quarry with a roughly another 250, 300 acres of leased land, which we were responsible for. I quite like to show this because I think this hopefully you'll get the sound. Again, this shows the pride in what we do as an industry. That is a last ton, 6 million tonnes, and it was given a guard of honour by all the plant and our own colleagues. And celebrate it. We all like celebrating the new, but sometimes we've got to celebrate the end of the old as well. And you know what's worth saying is that didn't take me to say we were going to do that. It didn't take the senior managers to say that. That came from the guys who run the plant, drive the loading shovels, drive the dumpers, drive the excavators. You know, that's their pride in the job more than anyone. And so, you know, a huge credit to them as well. Another thing we did is we got our neighbours involved. This couple is Mr. and Mrs. Roberts. They'd been our neighbours. They lived right at the end of the quarry there in a very nice house, and they'd been brilliant neighbours. We'd been to them many times and told them that they were going to have a lake at the end of the garden in 2016, 2017, 18. It goes on and on and on. But they understood. They worked with us. You know, we worked with them. And we wanted to say thank you. And so we invited them. We rigged it up so that there was a button that turned the pump off that had been dewatering Parkland's quarry for the previous 35, 40 years. This quarry, the water table is roughly 24 metres higher than you can see it there. So it's just lapping under the lip there. And so they came and turned the pump off for us. You know, a little gesture that went an incredibly long way. They enjoyed themselves. I had a fantastic afternoon. And it just gives us that engagement. And then because everyone likes, again, a video and a bit of noise, this was only 3 months after. Let's go back a step. So that picture was July 2020. In September, that's what the site looked like. All the plant had gone, all the steel had gone, and the last thing to come down was our 1,000-ton bin. So I used to hold 1,000 ton of calibrated sand, give you an idea of the size of it. And the easiest way to bring it down was with the traditional bang. So by November, all of the plant had gone. The land had been reprofiled. The pumps had gone off. Here in the bottom right corner, the lake that you'd seen Mr. and Mrs. Roberts turning the pump off had begun to flood. The water level was up. We did pump into there to try and increase the speed of that while we were still doing water in one of the other quarries. And over winter, just before winter, most of it was seeded, and there's a little bit of planting that's had to go over into this year just because of seasons and timing. But on all intents and purposes, we are gone, and we've put it back to what I'd like to think is better than we took originally all those years ago, which again is another one that the industry does a good job. The MPA do a great job at celebrating some of our restoration. The IOQ do a great job, but it's worth remembering that what we leave behind is our legacy. That's what people remember us by, and we put a concerted effort into, the local community, knowing that we put all of our commitment into putting that back to what we said we would put it back to when the planning went in. What next? Well, the process starts again, and the process never stops. So that drill rig is off somewhere else, drilling. We've got more samples. It's not me, thankfully, washing them anymore in the lab or the pilot plant. That's gone on to much smarter, younger, more dynamic people. But it just keeps going, and it keeps going, and keeps going. And for the reason being that there's the demand for the minerals, and that's the reason that we're here. So for me, I'm very conscious 50 minutes or 51 minutes of my hour has been consumed. That is the story of Silica in Cheshire, let's call it, and the best laid plans of mice and men.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. That was it was informative, very interesting. Does anybody have any questions?
In terms of the timeline you set out, you said that in 2007 you had you discounted the site for operational and volumetric reasons. I just wondered what the thinking was behind that, and what changed effectively.
But primarily volume that was in the ground, and conversations we were having with the landowners about maximising that, and other reserves that we had. And at the time, you got to remember back in 2007, maybe a little foresight. Then in 8 and 9, we hit the recession. Volumes dropped off. The requirement wasn't there. I'll be very honest, some of the markets weren't there, but we've done some work with the markets, which then justified the mineral and going forwards. And it's one of those that, as a business, I think as an industry, there's no harm in looking back, questioning the decisions that have been made in the past, and if some of the quantities have changed, pushing it forward.
Did you get much objection from the local neighbours? And if so, what were their objections, and what did you do to mitigate it?
Yeah, we did get quite a lot of objections. Well, officially we had well over 1,000, but 999 of those were the same letter. So I think we're all aware of how that sometimes operates. But we did multiple liaisons with the local community. From memory, I think we did 4 or 5 in the various villages that surround the site, in the local village halls, where people could come and speak to us direct. We'd also done mail drops, and we've done the traditional level information. People's biggest concerns, number one was traffic. The very small villages were quite close to the M6, and as most people know, the M6 can become snarled up quite quickly. That pushes people onto the A roads, and there was concerns about additional loading. But through traffic studies, we were able to disprove that and show what minimal effect we'd have. The biggest one was the risk of wagons turning out of the site and going through the local village, Goosetree. Again, we designed the entrance so you physically can't turn a wagon left when you come out of the site. There's not enough room, they're forced to go right. And then when the locals saw the modifications that we were planning on doing and did do to the junction, as well as the road, most people were on board with that. We engaged with local schools as well, getting people in, or communicating what we were going to do. If anything, our sort of how, I don't like to say it, but how well we'd operated at Chelford had been a disadvantage to us. So at Chelford, for many years, there was 1 million tonnes a year going out the door, and no one knew we were there. The number of times we were at local liaisons and people would bring up an image of a quarry in Australia or somewhere, or what's the one on Discovery Channel, gold hunters, where they've ripped up half of the Yukon. That's what they had in their mind we were going to do in the area. And when we said to them, well, have you ever travelled on the road from Chelford to Holmes Chapel? Well, yeah, I do it every day. Well, you're 24 metres from Chelford Quarry, from the actual Parklands Quarry, which is 30 metres deep, and we've took out X million a tonne. Do you know we're there? No, we didn't know you were there. And it was a combination of us not having our own wagons, our trucks not being livered up, us only having a small sign at the entrance. We become invisible, which we thought was good. We thought being a good neighbour was to be invisible. In reality, to be a good neighbour is to be invisible and visible at the same time, so people know that you're operating. So yeah, it was a case of just working with people and then continuing those conversations all the way through. Again,
Hi, this is Kaz. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there you go. I was about to say, Kaz has done most of this work.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just to add to that, obviously, once the project was okayed by the council, we set up the local liaison with the Sibelco team and obviously the locals. And straight away, as a company, we were very open and honest about everything that we were doing, which they were all very surprised at. So any question that they threw at us, we would answer it straight to the point. We don't cover things, and we'll explain to them the best it was. And a lot of the time, it was a lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding of actually what we were going to do and what they were expecting to be exposed to, really. And that was, once we got all that information out, and through myself, through Mike and the sustainability team, they had somebody they could actually talk to. So they weren't going through the local councils and having to go through all these different stages. They were actually able to come to us direct and ask the question and get a straight answer with, we give them the maps, we give them the diagrams and walk them through it. And that was what kind of gave people a bit more calm and a bit more relaxed about the situation, because they were able to go through that and see it happening in the area. And as soon as something crept in, they were able to come to the side and go, whoa, what's happening? Where's it going? And we could answer them truthfully about it. Even with the delays that we had with all the projects, we told them that. We told them that this was going to happen, and this was the time we sent out newsletters regularly through the parish councils and that it's really helped us to be that open to help people's concerns about how the project was going to go ahead and how it was going to affect them day to day, because that was what they're thinking of. They're going through to work, they're coming down the lane that we are on, and they, as Adam said, they were expecting to meet 20 million wagons pulling out, and how are they, and they walk down their day at the weekends with the families and the dogs. How are they going to see that? And hopefully that we've managed to ease those concerns by actually showing them how we actually do it as a company.
Fully agree, Kaz. Fully agree. And one of the ones that an education for us is in how Kaz and the team spoke to the locals. Because I'm very conscious today, we all know about quarrying. We all know what an 8-legger is, we all know what an Arctic is, we all know what an excavator is, we know what Dredge is, we know what we're talking about. And I remember at one of the liaison meetings, an individual came and he was concerned about respirable crystalline silica, which is a fair concern to have. And we started to explain to him, and he said these fateful words, which at the time got me annoyed. He said, "You're confusing the argument with facts." At the time, I digested the situation. I didn't go off like a bottle of pop till I went home, but I got home and I was fuming. And I thought, you can't confuse the situation with facts. In hindsight, you can. The facts work for me. I've got a good basic understanding of respirable crystalline silica. The general public hasn't. Once we diluted it down to a level that they could interpret and then build their knowledge upon, the arguments disappeared. But we make that assumption, or we get used to talking every day to people who understand our industry, understand what we do, understand how we operate. And the biggest barrier, I think, when we're talking to the general public is they haven't got that base knowledge, and to never be afraid to go back to those basic conversations. They won't be insulted. I'm never insulted if someone talks to me about the basics of operating a quarry. And what it does, it takes a lot of the fear away, and that we may be trying to hide something behind jargon.
Excellent. Adam, there's a couple of other questions. Are you happy to keep answering them? Because I'm conscious that we've got to the hour, assuming that people...
No, you get your hour out of me, and then you've got to pay extra after the hour. We're on waiting time now, Sarah. We're on waiting time.
I have two questions. I think it might be two related questions around the same sort of subject area. One was to do with what was it in particular about the deposit that made it essential to open a greenfield site? And then I think the related question, or kind of related question, is what was the reason for developing the new site as a wet dig rather than dewatering?
Yeah, so the simple answer to the first one, without getting into a commercial conversation, which would be sensitive, is demand. You know, the demand was there from the market. The reason we went for a wet dig was primary reason we weren't able to dewater it. There was no local brooks that would be able to take the volume of water in order to operate it dry. The secondary reason was to reduce impact on the local community. So, you know, if we dry dug it, very shallow deposit, even with bunds up, we'd have had potentially air-blown sand and we'd have struggled to seal it. Whereas wet digging it, all we've got is a small dredge that generates 62 decibels of noise. So it's significantly quieter than me talking. And the impact is minimal. All people see is a lake that gradually gets bigger every day. And so they were the main two reasons.
Perfect. There's another question that's come in about whether there were any safety issues that you had to address to man the dredger. Tongue in cheek, there is part of me that sort of says there was a really excellent presentation last month from North Wales branch on the dredging solution. Okay, so I will just get that little plug in now that is on YouTube and they're available to watch, and has had quite a good kind of number of people watching it since you presented it. But I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add with regards to safety issues on the dredger.
I will leave this to Kaz or Mike. One of those two can answer this one because they're far more competent to answer it than me. Unless they've dropped out already.
I thought you might pass it on.
There we go. Good answer.
Well, because obviously for us, it was a totally different learning curve. We're as obviously a UK-based side of things. Everything has always been dry dug. So looking at the dredger, it was a whole new experience of learning this. And what we did is we spoke to our European counterparts where they've got dredger systems in, and a lot bigger and a lot more substantial to what we have. So we learned from them as to how they were accessing the dredge, doing the pathways and all that side of it, and got their experience and found the best way for us, because they are in Europe, they are passing over a lot more substantial lake, whereas we aren't. We're only doing at the moment such small distances. So we had to look at how this would be best done by ourselves, and obviously the amount of times that operators need to travel to and fro from the dredge, and obviously as it expands, how we do that. So we've used a different, so we're using a little motorized boat to travel to and fro from the dredge. The staff have all got life jackets. It's a monitored system so that there's always somebody there on the shore side watching. And then we've also got pontoons, which we use for maintenance purposes, where they've got railings so it secures the staff on side so they can work alongside the pipeline. And then we're actually still developing this, but one of the things that we are looking at is actually floating the boat shed so that it moves with the water levels. So we haven't got to worry too much about water levels increasing or decreasing throughout the deposit. And it just makes it safer, obviously, for access. You've not got to worry about people then entering water that they're not expecting to be a certain depth. But it was a massive change for us of how we, to how we were going to go about this in the best way, in a movable way. That was the thing, is the fact that because it's such a shallow deposit, the dredge is always moving, and we needed to be able to, with whatever system we had, it needed to be able to be going with the dredge. So having the pontoon system and the boat, we were able to do that and move the dredge move the material with it. Whereas a fixed system, we would struggle. Then you'd end up, the staff would have to walk miles around the deposit to actually reach the dredge. So there's been a lot of flexibility and a lot of alterations to make sure that this is the most safest and obviously easiest way for the staff and operators to get in and out, maintenance as well as the operators on a daily basis.
I'm thinking, Sarah and Mark, that Kaz has signed herself up for a winter 2020 webinar on dredge safety.
Don't you dare.
There you go. Job done.
In the calendar.
In the calendar, it's done. Chairman, vice chairman have agreed, so we're on that one. Very good.
Just a question about the planning, really. Obviously, quite a big delay from submission to getting the approval. The fact of the local authorities not having dedicated mineral planning officers, and if so, how would you learn from that going forward? Well,
I didn't comment at the beginning. We had a dedicated mineral planning authority, planning officer. We actually took out PPA with both of the councils, so we paid to have a designated full-time planning officer, and unfortunately that didn't speed the process up particularly. I think what has our lesson learned been? To use the policy. Policy is often used against us. We don't always use policy in our favour and hold the councils accountable to the timelines, and not in an aggressive, not in a nasty way, but just in a continuous reminding approach. Because you have a very apt point there, Brian. They are stretched. All of the planning authorities that I deal with across the country are stretched, and they don't have the dedicated resource they used to. And not through intention, but you can fall down the list. The best way of keeping yourself at the top of the list is to keep reminding them. I didn't comment in it, but there was a point where I went to the offices every day. We got to that point where every day I drove to Chester and went to the office door and said, I'd like to speak to the CEO of Cheshire and Cheshire West. Can I please speak to him about the planning application? And it's amazing that I never spoke to him because he didn't want to speak to me, but things started to speed up ever so slightly. And the other reason I did that, Brian, is because I told everyone that if we didn't get planning in time and the lads lost the job, I was going as well. And I've got a mortgage to pay, so we had vested interest.
And is there anything further about what caused the government to call the application in for review?
It was raised by the local MP. So it was raised by Esther McVeigh, who's the MP for Tatton. And that's all that it required for it to be called in by the Secretary of State.
So that was basically what somebody complained to her as their local MP.
Yeah.
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for having me. I'd have been here anyway, but no, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and hopefully people can take something from that and have that balance on the world that whatever LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram says, where it all looks perfect, it isn't.
Thank you very much, Adam.
No problem.
Thank you everybody for attending, and keep yourselves safe.